Dear students, I welcome you all to this lecture on modern political philosophy. In this lecture, we will study the ongoing debates on Marxism. Particularly, we will look at what is popularly known as the Miliband-Poulantzas debate. This debate is centered on the question of the nature and function of states in advanced capitalist societies. The objectives of this lecture are to know about the Marxist theory of state, to learn about structural Marxism and instrumentalist Marxism, to study the Miliband-Poulantzas debate on the nature of the state. Dear students, I hope you all remember what Marxism is. We have already discussed Marx and his central concepts in detail in previous lectures. As discussed before, Marxism first appeared in the middle of the 19th century in response to the oppressive conditions created by the capitalist system. It is a social, economic and political philosophy that analyzes the uneven distribution of wealth and privileges in society because of the ruling class. Marxism has taken many forms in its evolution over the years. To understand the significance of the Miliband-Poulantzas debate, now let us have a look at the Marxist theory of state. There has been much controversy over the Marxist theory of state. Marxist theory is often presented as the opposite of the liberal conception of politics and state. For some Marxists, the control of the bourgeois over the functionaries of the state is direct. This control is supported by the common social networks to which the members of the bourgeoisie and the political class belong, and by the financial dependence of the state on the bourgeoisie. Marx regarded the state as evil because it was a product of a society loaded with irreconcilable class struggles. The state belonged to the realm of the superstructure as it was conditioned and determined by its economic base. In the course of history, each mode of production would give rise to its own specific political organization, which would further the interests of the economically dominant class. For Marx and Engels, the state expressed human alienation. It was an instrument of class exploitation and class oppression. From a historical point of view, the Marxists say that in every stage of history, a particular class has controlled the means of production and exploited the other classes. Frederick Engels observed that the primitive communities were responsible for dividing society into antagonistic classes, accompanied by the emergence of the state. When there was surplus production, a class arose in the society which managed to secure ownership of the means of production and forced the rest of the classes to work for their masters. The dominant class created the machinery of the state to maintain its hold on economic power. Engels writes, and I quote, "State is, as a rule, the state of most powerful, economically dominant class, which through the medium of the states becomes also the politically dominant class and thus acquires new means of holding down and exploiting the oppressed class." Unquote. For Marxists, espousing the relative autonomy of the state thesis, the state can manage the common affairs of the entire bourgeoisie only by maintaining a certain independence from different sections of it. These commentators also point out that in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, Marx clearly showed how the state becomes powerful and maintains its own independent agenda when the social conditions are such that the emerging bourgeois cannot establish itself fully. The importance of the state for Marx can also be seen in his belief that the proletariat must capture state power in order to bring about the workers' revolution. Marx was an advocate of the dictatorship of the proletariat, by which he meant that the proletariat would have to exclude the members of the bourgeoisie from the state till the time all private property was not taken back. The alternative that Marx envisaged was a classless, stateless society of true democracy and full communism in which the political state disappeared. Once the basis of class society had been abolished, Marx said the state would simply wither away, since the state was always an institution meant to maintain class power. So naturally, the absence of classes meant the absence of the state. Dear students, the Miliband-Poulantzas debate was a debate between the instrumentalist Marxists and the structuralist Marxists. So let us now discuss the meaning of structural and instrumentalist Marxism. Let us begin with structural Marxism. Structural Marxism is a theoretical framework that combines elements of Marxism, mainly its focus on economic structures and class relations, with structuralist methodologies borrowed from linguistics, anthropology, and other social sciences. It emerged in the mid-20th century as a response to perceived limitations in classical Marxism and sought to address some of its shortcomings. Some main characteristics of structural Marxism include structural analysis. Structural Marxism emphasizes the importance of analyzing the underlying structures of society, such as the economic base and the superstructure, including politics, culture, ideology, etc. It attempts to uncover the hidden relations that shape social phenomena. Economic determinism. Like classical Marxism, structural Marxism maintains that modes of production and the distribution of resources are fundamental in shaping social relations. However, one of the criticisms of classical Marxism was its economic reductionism, which was seen as reducing all social phenomena to economic factors. Structural Marxism aimed to address this limitation by incorporating structuralist methodologies which allowed for a more nuanced understanding of how different structures intersect and influence one another. In addition to economic factors, structural Marxism also pays attention to the role of cultural and ideological elements in shaping social relations. This includes analyzing how dominant ideologies are perpetuated and challenged. Class relations. Class struggle and inequality are also central themes in structural Marxism. However, this approach also acknowledges that class is not the only determinant of social dynamics and that other factors like gender, ethnicity, and culture can also play significant roles. Structural Marxism highlights the multiple contradictions within society, including those between different social structures and their corresponding interests. Althusserian influence. The work of Louis Althusser, a French Marxist philosopher, profoundly impacted the development of structural Marxism. Althusser's ideas emphasized the concept of ideological state apparatuses, which are institutions like schools, media, and religion that help maintain the dominance of the ruling class. It is important to note that structural Marxism, like any other theoretical framework, has been subject to critique and debate. Some critics argue that it may overly emphasize structural determinism and neglect the agency of individuals and social movements. Let us now look at the meaning of instrumentalist Marxism. Instrumentalist Marxism is a view of the role of the state from a Marxist perspective. Instrumentalism in the context of Marxism refers to the belief that institutions, including the state, are primarily tools or instruments used by dominant social groups to maintain their control over society and further their own interests. This concept is often associated with Marxist theories of state. Instrumentalism suggests that the state is an instrument that enforces the interests of the ruling class, particularly the bourgeoisie in a capitalist society. The instrumentalist Marxist approach stresses the importance of the intimate connection of the capitalist class to the state power apparatus and argues that this interconnection explains political and economic policies in capitalist societies. According to Joshua S. Goldstein, instrumental Marxism is a theory that reasons that policy makers in government and positions of power tend to share a common business or class background and that their decisions will reflect their business or class interests. Dear students, let us now learn about the primary figures involved in the Miliband-Poulantzas debate, Ralph Miliband and Nikos Poulantzas. Let us begin with Ralph Miliband. Ralph Miliband, a notable political theorist, Marxist and socialist, was born in Brussels, Belgium in 1924. In May 1940, Miliband fled Brussels with his father to England as Hitler's army was invading Belgium. He continued his education in London, graduating from the Department of Government at the London School of Economics in 1947. He obtained a doctorate for a thesis entitled Popular Thought in the French Revolution 1789 to 1794 from the University of London in 1956. In 1949, he was appointed assistant lecturer in political science at the LSE. Miliband subsequently became a senior lecturer at the LSE and continued teaching there until 1972. In 1972, he was appointed professor of politics and head of the Department of Politics at the University of Leeds. After leaving the University of Leeds, he lectured at Brandeis University. As a writer, he deployed a broad political culture and clarity of argument. Two of his books, Parliamentary Socialism, published in 1969, and The State in Capitalist Society, published in 1972, became classics during the 60s and 70s. He was in great demand at campuses throughout Britain and North America during this time. Miliband's writings are most notable for re-establishing an instrumentalist theory of the state, which many scholars subsequently adopted for conducting research on political institutions and public policy. Before Miliband, the instrumentalist theory of the state had been articulated ambiguously by Paul Sweezy, who asserted that the state is an instrument in the hands of the ruling class for enforcing and guaranteeing the stability of the class structure itself. Miliband's theoretical reading of classical Marxism begins with the observation that Marx himself never attempted a systematic study of the state. As Miliband conceives it, the state does not exist as such. It is instead a conceptual reference point that stands for a number of particular institutions which together constitute its reality and which interact as parts of what may be called the state system. This state system is actually composed of 5 elements that are each identified with a cluster of particular institutions. Number 1, the governmental apparatus, which consists of elected legislative and executive authorities at the national level, which makes state policy. Number 2, the administrative apparatus, consisting of the civil service bureaucracy, public corporations, central banks, and regulatory commissions which regulate economic, social, cultural, and other activities. Number 3, the coercive apparatus, consisting of the military, paramilitary, police, and intelligence agencies which together are concerned with the deployment and management of violence. Number 4, the judicial apparatus, which include courts, the legal profession, jails and prisons, and other components of the criminal justice system. And lastly, number 5, the sub-central governments, comprising of states, provinces, departments, counties, municipal governments, and special districts. One of the most direct indicators of ruling class domination of the state is the degree to which members of the capitalist class control the state apparatus through interlocking positions in the governmental, administrative, coercive, and other apparatuses. Miliband emphasizes that, and I quote, "It is these institutions in which state power lies, and it is through them that this power is wielded in its different manifestations by the people who occupy the leading positions in each of these institutions." Unquote. Let us now look at Nikos Poulantzas. Famous for his concept of the relative autonomy of the state as well as for his debate with Ralph Miliband, Nikos Poulantzas was a formative neo-Marxist theorist of politics. Born into a prominent family in Greece in 1936, Poulantzas studied law at the University of Athens before moving to France, where he completed his doctoral studies in the philosophy of law. During this time, he was closely associated with the existential Marxism of Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. Poulantzas, however, began moving away from existentialism in 1966 and increasingly came to be influenced by the structuralist Marxism of Louis Althusser. It is mainly in this context, as an Althusserian or structuralist, that Poulantzas has come to be known in political philosophy. In structuralist theory, the objective effects of state policies on capital accumulation and class structure are the leading objective indicators of state power. Bob Jessop observes that, and I quote, "State power is capitalist to the extent that it creates, maintains, or restores the conditions required for capital accumulation in a given situation, and it is non-capitalist to the extent these conditions are not realized." Unquote. Like Marx and Engels before him, Poulantzas believed that the fundamental role of the state is to defend class power. But the capitalist state, he argued, does this in a complex way that is obscured both by liberal and traditional Marxist theory. Poulantzas defines state power as the capacity of a social class to realize its objective interests through the state apparatus. Poulantzas' most crucial work in this context was Political Power and Social Classes, published in 1968. It is in this work that he first developed the idea of the relative autonomy of the state. According to Poulantzas, for the state to properly function as a capitalist state, it must be able to go against the individual and particular interests of capitalists in order to act in their general class interests. In other words, the state must be relatively autonomous from the interests and demands of capitalists. This argument also implied that the state could not be reduced to some reflection of economic relations or interests, as more orthodox Marxists had often done. Let us now look at the Miliband-Poulantzas debate. In 1969, the New Left Review, a British journal, published Poulantzas' critical review of Miliband's book, The State in Capitalist Society. This review was the first blast in what came to be known as the Miliband-Poulantzas debate. The debate largely hinged on whether the class bias of the state was a product of the class origins and affiliations of those individuals who occupied the top positions within state institutions, as argued by Miliband, or whether the class bias of the state was more a product of its structures and functions, as claimed by Poulantzas. Beyond separating Marxists into a divide of instrumentalist and structuralist camps, the debate highlighted a renewed Marxist interest in the theory of politics. The debate provoked an intense growth of research on the state, a still ongoing body of inquiry often referred to as state theory. Although indebted to Marx's writings, Miliband was also aware that Marx never attempted a systematic study of the state comparable to the one conducted by Miliband, but instead left a collection of political writings that are unsystematic, fragmentary, and sometimes self-contradictory. This ambiguity in Marx's work quickly led to a disagreement with Poulantzas, who became the leading spokesperson for a structuralist theory of the state. Poulantzas' well-publicized methodological differences with Miliband were deeply influenced by the French structuralist philosopher Louis Althusser. Still, like Miliband, he also claims to draw on the works of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Gramsci, and to provide a systematic political theory by elucidating implicit ideas and axioms in their practical writings. Yet, where Miliband placed Marx and Engels' The Communist Manifesto at the center of his political theory, Poulantzas identifies Capital as the major theoretical work of Marxism. The chief difficulty in designating Capital as Marx's central theoretical treatise is that it is an unfinished work with no theory of social class and no theory of the state. Miliband focuses on Marx's famous dictum in the Communist Manifesto, and I quote, "The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the affairs of the whole bourgeoisie," unquote. The state in these class societies is primarily and inevitably the guardian and protector of the economic interests that are dominant in them. Its fundamental purpose is to ensure their continued predominance, not to prevent it. Miliband puts forth his theory of how the state functions to serve capitalist interests. It does so, he claims, because of the social origins of members of state government and the personal ties and influence between members of state government and the ruling class elites. In a nutshell, the role of the state is to serve the interest of capitalists. Miliband's book was reviewed by Poulantzas, where he sets out his own structural theory of the state. Poulantzas argues that the state is objectively capitalist. What he meant by this is that the state can serve no purpose other than preserving the capitalist mode of production. The fact that the political and economic classes are the same is entirely coincidental in his theoretical approach. The state serves capitalism regardless of which person is in power. Poulantzas claims that the basic structure of the capitalist mode of production generates contradictory class practices and crisis tendencies that inevitably disrupt the capitalist system at the economic, political, and ideological levels. These crisis tendencies and contradictions necessitate a separate structure to maintain and restore its equilibrium as a system specifically. The relation between the bourgeois class and the state is objective. This means that if the function of the state in a determinate social formation and the interests of the dominant class coincide, it is because of the system itself. The direct participation of members of the ruling class in the state apparatus is not the cause but the effect. The debate has been based on some of the later writings of Marx, like the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, where Marx said that the ruling class is not always well organized and sufficiently assertive. Naturally, its extent of control over the state may not be far-reaching. The ruling class is also divided into various groups and factions. Under such circumstances, it cannot fully control the state machinery. The ruling class is forced to make compromises with all other groups. The lack of organization in the ruling class sometimes becomes a limiting factor in its control over the working class. Although Poulança's modified systems analysis by introducing class conflict as a disbalancing mechanism, he was nevertheless clearly indebted to the American functionalists and systems theorists in arguing that the general function of the state in the capitalist mode of production is its function as the regulating factor of its global equilibrium as a system. Whereas Miliband articulates an institutionalist conception of power, Poulança's articulates a functionalist conception of power anchored by the methodological assumptions of structural functionalism. In direct contrast to Miliband, Poulança draws a sharp analytic distinction between the concepts of state power and the state apparatus. Poulança defines the state apparatus as the place of the state in the group of the structures of a social formation, that is, the state's functions, and the personnel of the state, the ranks of the administration, bureaucracy, army, etc. The state apparatus is a unity of the effects of state power, that is, policies, and the network of institutions and personnel through which the state function is executed. Poulança emphasizes the functional unity between state power and the state apparatus, with the observation that structure is not the simple principle of organization which is exterior to the institution. Dear students, let us now conclude this lecture. Much of 20th century sociology, political theory, or political economy has been a response to Marx's questioning of class and state and the functioning of democracy in societies with sharp economic inequalities. The Miliband-Poulança debate has significantly contributed to the reconstruction of Marxism according to the developments in the contemporary world. Further, it has also revived interest in the Marxist theory of the state and the nature of the state in general. So, dear students, I hope you enjoyed learning about the Miliband-Poulança debate. See you soon with another lecture on modern political philosophy. Thank you.